So welcome to the first session of Theology under Quarantine. I have found over the past few weeks, as we've been dealing with this really just unprecedented and crazy situation, that theological questions have been coming to me. I know that in the hierarchy of people's needs, theology is pretty low on the list for most people. I get that, but I do think really important theological questions are being provoked by what's going on in the world around us right now. So I thought, let's set aside some time once a week. I'm hoping this will be just 15 minutes each time where we can look at some of the questions that are being provoked by this crisis. So theology under quarantine, that's what we're doing. So today we're going to talk about distancing and disorientation. For the next couple of weeks, you'll see I'm looking at pandemics and providence, which is just a way of asking, where is God in this? Is the pandemic somehow an act of God? We'll reflect on that together next week. And then the last one, coronavirus and church, which is just a chance to think about the church is sort of rapidly evolving right now, trying to adjust to this new life situation. And I think a lot of good is coming out of that. But what are some things that we are risking losing in that process? So we'll think about all of that 3 weeks from now. But for today, we're going to look at distancing and disorientation. I should tell you, hopefully you have my email address. You can use that to email me. If you disagree with me, if you think I'm wrong, won't be surprising, send me an email. Also, email me if you have questions that you think it would be good for us to think about together in future Theology Under Quarantine sessions, because we don't know how long we're going to be here. So, distancing and disorientation. Let's go ahead and get started. Walter Brueggemann, famous Old Testament theologian, talks about 3 seasons of life: orientation, disorientation, and new orientation. He developed this partly from Paul Ricoeur, doesn't really matter. He developed it as a way of reading the book of Psalms. The book of Psalms has sometimes been called a geography of the soul, and pretty much any human experience that you can imagine, you find somewhere in the book of Psalms. So Walter Brueggemann used this as a way of reading the book of Psalms, but it's clear that we see this same pattern playing out over and over again throughout Scripture and really throughout history and even throughout our lives. So I think it's a really helpful lens for thinking about where we are and how we should be responding to where we are. So let's take just a minute to look at each of these seasons of life. We'll start with orientation. In each case, I'm going to start with a psalm that kind of shows what that season is about. So Psalm 8, a psalm of orientation. I'm not going to read all of Psalm 8 to you. You have it on your screen and you can look it up. But just to give you a sense of it, when I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you're mindful of them, mortals that you care for them? Yet you have made them a little lower than God and crowned them with glory and honor. On and on it goes like this, celebrating creation and our place within creation. So what do we see going on in a psalm of orientation, in a season of orientation? We experience reliability and contentment. We experience the world as settled, as comfortable, and we know our place within it. Everything makes sense and everything is really as it should be. So we experience contentment in that, in a season of orientation. What's our work during a season of orientation? Our work is gratitude. Our work is expressing thanksgiving for the good and faithful ordering of creation, which is sustaining us. If you can imagine sort of an idealized Thanksgiving scene, I say idealized because I know not all Thanksgiving celebrations are like this, but you're gathered around the table with family and friends, you have home and warmth and plenty of food, and you're grateful. That's a perfect image of orientation. So our work during a season of orientation is gratitude. But we know that we can't stay in a season of orientation. We would like to. We spend most of our time, those of us especially who come from a privileged background, we spend most of our time trying to either stay in orientation or get back to orientation because the status quo is pretty good for us. So that's where we invest a lot of our energy. But the truth is, we can't stay in orientation. First, because life won't let us. Life comes at us and disrupts and destabilizes every stable system. But secondly, from a sort of biblical imagination, you find throughout the Bible the idea that if God is going to give us something new, God has to shake us free from our clinging to what is old. Now, I want to be really clear. I am not suggesting that that this pandemic is somehow an act of God. We're going to talk about that a whole lot in our next session. What I am suggesting is the Bible imagines that if we stay in orientation, it makes it impossible for us to receive the new thing God is trying to do. So we can't stay in orientation. We know that. So we have to practice certain things to begin moving toward disorientation. And here I've just identified two. One is letting go. It's recognizing that nothing lasts forever. We have to be prepared to let go of things that we've been clinging to so that we can receive the new thing that's coming. And then second is trusting that even as we start to move toward disorientation, even though none of us really wants to do that, we trust that God goes with us into disorientation, and that ultimately God is holding us and bringing us something new in the midst of these challenging days. So as we move towards disorientation, we practice this letting go and this trusting. All right, let's talk about disorientation, the second season that we experience. Here I've got Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, and there we wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung up our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs, and our tormentors asked for mirth, saying, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." How could we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? Obviously, Psalm 137 is written after the people go into exile. So the experience of disorientation, what do we experience? Well, we experience chaos. All of the things that we took for granted, everything that was settled in a season of orientation has become unsettled, and not something that we can rely upon anymore. So we experience chaos, we experience anxiety. The things that we relied on are no longer sure, and that creates fear and anxiety in us. All of that's inevitable. So what's our practice? What should we be doing in a season of disorientation? One thing is, I think we should be honest about our grief. We need to acknowledge what we're losing, what has passed away. Something good is being taken from us, and we need to be honest about that and acknowledge that. And more generally, we need to practice honesty in a time of disorientation. It doesn't do any good to deny that that's where we are. So we need to be honest about what has led us to this place, about where we are, and about not being in control of where we're going. So grief and honesty are important practices during the season of disorientation. And of course, we don't stay in disorientation either. Even in the midst of disorientation, we start to see the seeds of a new orientation, something new coming about. And so we have a practice during disorientation too. We practice hope. We have to accept that while we might not be in control, our lives are not defined by this disorientation, that there are still possibilities for newness and a new reality. And we have to practice openness because we can't control the new thing that's coming. We have our work to do. We have important things to do to participate in the new thing coming, but ultimately it's not in our control. And so we have to practice openness to what's coming because we can't determine ahead of time exactly what that's going to look like. So finally, let's turn to the third season, new orientation. Here I have Psalm 98. Oh, sing to the Lord a new song, for he has done marvelous things. Jump down towards the middle. Sing praises to the Lord with the lyre and the sound of melody, with trumpets and the sound of the horn. Make a joyful noise before the King, the Lord. Let the sea roar and all that fills it. And so on and so on. The song of celebration of new life, the gift being given again and again. So the first thing I want to say about new orientation is that notice it's not reorientation. It's not simply a return to the old orientation, a return to what was. That's what we most want. That's what we think we want anyway. But new orientation is different. It is a new reality. And partly it's something that we have worked toward, but also it's something that is given to us as a gift. It comes to us through grace. So we experience this as true newness, truly as a gift, and it's grace. It comes to us partly from God and not simply from our own doing. What's our practice in new orientation? It's joy. In orientation, we experience happiness, we experience contentment, but in new orientation, we experience joy, this sense of grace and surprise and wonder that the gift has been given again and again and again. So that's new orientation. So you see, you kind of imagine these seasons as a cycle. Now, I want to be clear, it's not orderly or predictable. It doesn't always go this way. But there's a general sense that our life moves in these cycles from orientation into disorientation, into new orientation, and then slowly that new orientation becomes orientation again, and we continue this kind of spiral or this sort of evolution. Again, it's not inevitable, but it plays out in this pattern over and over again. And remember, the promise or the insight is that if you stay in orientation, if you refuse to let go of that old orientation and enter into disorientation, it becomes impossible to receive the new thing, the new orientation that God is doing. So that's the challenge we have in front of us. I just want to point out this pattern plays out over and over again in the Bible. You could argue the whole Bible, creation, fall, redemption, is orientation, disorientation, new orientation. You have the people of Israel. They play out this story over and over again. They're in Egypt, wandering in the wilderness. They arrive in the promised land. Then they're in the promised land. They go into exile. They experience homecoming, orientation, disorientation, new orientation, over and over again. We see it in the life of Jesus, the life, death, resurrection of Jesus, orientation, disorientation, new orientation. So this pattern plays out over and over again in the Bible and over again in our lives. So let's stay with disorientation for one more minute, because that is obviously where we are right now. We all experience disorientation, seasons of that in our lives. Often it's personal, sometimes it's our families, maybe whole communities experience it. And there have even been moments in world history where nations are experiencing disorientation. I think you could argue that this moment is one of the most profound moments of global disorientation that we have ever experienced, because almost every nation on the planet is being touched by this pandemic and is experiencing disorientation in one way or another. So the practices that we talked about, the things we experience in disorientation, apply right now in this moment just as much as any other season of disorientation. We obviously are experiencing chaos and anxiety and the breakdown of our normal patterns of life. Our settled orientation are kind of falling apart right now. We all are experiencing that. Our work remains the same as any season of disorientation. We have to grieve. We have to grieve what's being lost. And in some cases, this is loved ones that are being lost or that will experience loss, loved ones who are suffering. But I think we're also grieving loss of social relationships, loss of social practices. We're grieving a loss of innocence and a loss of faith in our systems and in our structures, in our public health organizations, and our leaders. All of these are there's amazing things happening, but at the same time, they're being shaken right now, and our absolute trust in them is being tested, and we're kind of grieving an innocence about that, I think. We have to practice honesty about where we have come from and where we are and where we're going. Honesty is a way of working against denial. There's a great temptation to practice denial in the midst of disorientation. Oh, we're not really in disorientation, or we can quickly and easily return to the old way of being. We can quickly and easily return to old orientation. That's not how disorientation works in the Bible. We have to practice patience and faithfulness and honesty about where we are and about that we are not completely in control of where we're going. And as I say, we have work to do as we think about moving toward a new orientation. Partly is hope. It's recognizing that even in the midst of this pandemic, there are divine energies at work, moving towards healing, moving towards compassion. And we see that, and we need to participate in those things and have hope in those things. And also an openness to the future that is coming to be. We are not completely in control. We have important work to do, but we are not finally in control of the new future that is coming about, this new orientation. Partly it's being determined by our leaders and our scientists and our doctors and the work that all of us are doing. Partly it's being determined by the virus, which we don't really have control over, obviously. But partly, as people of faith, we believe that the Spirit is at work and that there are divine powers at work here, shaping a new future that we're not completely in control of. So we have to practice openness and not pretend like we're in control in a way that we're not, which takes a level of faith to do that. So the question that I think we need to contemplate in this time as we think about this season of disorientation is, as we start to think about what's next, will we simply return to an old orientation? Will we seek reorientation, or will we seek true new orientation? Will we seize this opportunity, difficult as it is, to find a new orientation, a new world, one that's marked hopefully by compassion and justice and joy? So that's the theological question I want to put in front of you today. Don't hesitate to email me any of your questions or comments, or if I've said anything ridiculous, I look forward to hearing that from you. And I look forward to talking to you next week, Theology Under Quarantine. Take care.